you so much. I am a diplomat and I was until recently ambassador to Sweden. I want to thank you for a very illuminating and engaging lecture, and to the European Institute for inviting you here. As a point of information, Nigel Lawson, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, whom you mentioned, was for many, many years chairman of the UK-Romania Business Chamber. So he was not a Europhile, he is not a Europhile. Even the most Eurosceptics of the Tories in Britain have run good business in Romania. I have lots of questions. I'll try to raise only one or two. I'm wondering how the Scottish nationalists will play the referendum, because there's a case to make that they will be helped by Britain deciding to leave the EU. And secondly, I believe you understand how strange and paradoxical this whole situation is. If you came to Romania 10 years ago, the best trainers that we had, people who explained us the European Union, they were all British civil servants. We as diplomats, we were trained in the great tradition of the British diplomacy. How did we get here? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The second question is here. There.
Thank you. You said...
your name is Claudia?
Claudia Pustincescu. I'm a legal professional and researcher in political science. Very interesting your presentation, and I really feel sorry that I missed a part of it in the beginning. You said that it's not such a big problem from England leaving Europe because you can handle it on yourself. You have Britain has business globally and so on. But that sounds a bit arrogant, some people say. And imagine, okay, you got...
Never underestimate British arrogance.
Yes. So imagine, let's make an exercise. Imagine that you've got it. You are out of EU, you are on your own. How is that gonna come? Because you just said earlier, Britain has an interest in the single market. Britain is a traditional ally of US. Maybe next year will come a Republican president. Maybe Americans will say, okay, we want you in Europe, what you are gonna do. And there are lots of projects that I'm following. For instance, Stronger in Europe Together, something like that. That is a lobbying from Britain, going stronger for the idea of Britain staying with all the advantages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And the third question? Here, okay. And maybe the fourth.
Hello, from the Studies and Analysis Unit within the European Institute of Romania. My question would regard the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, because you made a few mentions before. How the process of negotiations will continue if Britain will leave the European Union?
That's enough for now. Former ambassador. One thing the Eurosceptics in Britain, or a large proportion of Eurosceptics in Britain, like to keep reminding people is they say we're anti-EU, we're not anti-European. Nigel Farage is married to a German and speaks French and German. He used to live in Frankfurt and Paris. And Boris Johnson, who could, well, he's holding his cards close to his chest, and there's some speculation he could actually come out and become the leader of the Leave campaign. He's waiting to see which way the opinion polls go. Boris Johnson is, he's a quarter Russian, a quarter Jewish, and a quarter German, and he's got like 8 quarters of different European nationalities. And he'd say, and speaks a dozen languages, and grew up in Brussels, and went to European school in Brussels. And it's kind of, he's not an anti-European. You can't possibly think of him in that sense. So these are not Eurosceptics in the way that, say, Le Pen is a Eurosceptic, or the True Finns in Finland are Eurosceptics. It's really something qualitatively different, and it's very hard to understand. Scottish nationalism. The SNP are insisting that if the UK votes by majority to leave, but the majority in Scotland does not, then they will say that they will prevent Britain leaving. I'm not sure how. They insist on what they're calling a double majority. It must be a majority of the English and a majority of the Scots. They will not allow the UK to impose Brexit on the Scottish people. That's what they're saying. Legally, they have no basis to do that, but politically what that means is that triggers a second referendum in Scotland on the Scottish independence. But there's voices in the Scottish National Party that are very worried that if we left the EU, and there's the UK standing alone, the Scottish public would then be even more nervous about leaving the UK. Because they would worry about there being a new border, and the English saying, we're going to build a border with passport controls and everything else. It will be a different country. So I actually think the Scottish National Party, the mainstream view of the Scottish National Party is their interests are better protected by the UK staying in, and then Britain and England and Scotland becoming separate within the European Union. They think that's much more of a safer option for them going forward. Because they say that what their legal analysis tells them is that a vote in the House of Commons would dissolve the UK, and then England and Wales on the one side and Scotland on the other would become successor states. And as successor states, they would be signatories of all previous treaties. Like the separation, they like to use the analogy of the separation of Czechoslovakia. So the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic became successor states of all previous treaty agreements of Czechoslovakia. There's some legal argument, of course. The Commission of Legal Scholars and the Council Legal Service will tell you Scotland has to leave and apply to membership, and they say we have legal experts on international law who say something completely different, so it's not clear either way. How did we get here? Well, all the way along, Britain was never committed to political integration. We always pretended it was purely an economic project, and we can roll all the way back to the 1950s. And there's a famous quote from Russell Brotherton, the British negotiator in the Messina conference, who left the conference halfway through and said, "You're not going to agree. If you do agree, you won't be able to implement it. And if you implement it, it won't work." And that's the sort of sceptical or arrogant British attitude towards the European integration project since the beginning. We had that nobody in Britain ever believed that there would be a single currency. Even when it was in the treaties, even when there was the 3 stages of integration, none of the British elite believed this was ever really going to happen. They woke up one day and went, how did that happen? So all the way along, the Brits have not really understood the deep political motivation, particularly amongst German elite and the French elite and the Benelux elite and the Italian and Spain. Italy and Spain for deeper political union within Europe. I mean, I was in Madrid teaching a few weeks ago for some policymakers in Madrid, telling them talking about the crisis in Europe. The overwhelming view of these policymakers in Madrid, they were kind of scratching their heads and saying, "Oh, it's obvious we're going to have a deeper federal union within the Eurozone. Of course we are. We're going to have Eurozone bonds, and it was sort of obvious from their point of view." And I was thinking, really? Is it that obvious? Go and tell Schäuble. So I think in Britain we don't understand, we've never really understood. So it's not really a surprise we've got to where we are. At a certain point, if you think of European integration as a teleological step-by-step of a common market leads to a single market, leads to a single currency, leads to common fiscal policies, leads to political union, as Bela Balassa, some Hungarian economist, wrote. Everyone thought he was mad when he wrote that in the 50s. But this is where we look back and we say this teleological logic was absolutely right. Balassa was right. But at some point on that trajectory, Britain will have to get off if it's not willing to accept the logical trajectory that leads to political union. Britain will have to leave. And so that's, how do we get here is exactly that. TTIP. TTIP, unfortunately, will not be agreed before we have the referendum in the UK, and it's playing into the hands of the Leave campaign, because the Leave campaign is saying TTIP is not going to be agreed. See, look at the demonstrations in Germany, look at the skepticism in France. We could actually get a much quicker trade deal with the US if we left the EU. Yeah, and the Remain campaign has to make the argument we get a better trade deal with the US if we stay in the EU, because the EU is much stronger. The EU has got a really good trade deal with Korea. The EU is going to get a better trade deal with the US. If you leave, we could be picked off. The US will just do a separate deal with us that won't be as good as the deal that will be eventually done with the EU. And so that's the sort of argument that's been going on. And the Eurosceptics are saying, they had this report that was saying, we leave the EU, we could get a quick trade deal with Canada, Australia, the US, China, Singapore, Korea, you name it, in their shopping list. They have this fantasy of this kind of, as it was pointed out at the back, never underestimate British arrogance. And the Remain campaign, so I get accused of being not patriotic enough, because if I say, you know, it's dangerous out there in the cold, we're dependent on the single market, we need the single market to be part of it. They will say, you don't think Britain could stand up for itself? You're clearly not, you know, you're anti-British, clearly. So they're throwing around, Rose yesterday, launching the Remain campaign, said, no, we are the pro-British. The Leave campaign are the anti-British. They're the ones who will damage British interests if we leave. And the fact that he has to say that tells you the terms of the debate. That they're each claiming the mantle of being pro-British. Because they say if you're opposed to it, if you're sceptical, if you think we cannot stand alone independently, then clearly you're not. You don't believe in Britain.
We'll continue with the questions.
It's just a follow-up question, in fact, because the two-tier Europe was already mentioned, and the Scotland versus Britain was already mentioned by you. So my question was, in fact, whether you could connect the idea of two-tier European Union with the devolution process that we're seeing all throughout, especially in Western Europe. But I can see it happening gradually as well, too. Thanks.